Welcome to the Greater Montana Foundation Legacy Project, preserving the history of Montana broadcasting and the pioneers of communication whose vision and foresight brought together the people of Montana.
Hi, I'm Bill Whitsett, former news director at KRTV Television in Great Falls and the first anchor of the Montana Television Network news organization that I put together. I'm delighted today to be here with Dan Snyder, a real pioneer Montana broadcaster, a mentor to many people in the Montana broadcast industry, including me. And so this is a special treat for me to be chatting with Dan today. But we're engaged in a project for the Greater Montana Foundation and the Montana Historical Society to capture the stories of the pioneer broadcasters and how they have led Montana to the broadcasting status that it is today, and how they will affect future generations of broadcasters. So it's my distinct pleasure, Dan, to talk to you and ask you a number of questions to help you tell the story of a great career and a great impact that you've had on not only broadcasters, but Montana. So I thought about, with a 66-year career, if my count is about accurate, in broadcasting that you've had, I thought to myself, how do we even start? Where do we start? And then I said, well, it's obvious. Let's start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about you and your background, if you will, and your family and your roots, so we can chat a little bit about how you came to Montana and how you came to do what you did. But what is the beginning for Dan Snyder?
Well, my roots go back to Kentucky. I was born in Louisville, Kentucky. And I had some roots in radio because my father was an engineer for WLW in Cincinnati when they were licensed to 500,000 watts. So there was a little bit of radio background there, but it didn't sink into me. I guess my career in the Army Air Corps was instrumental in me getting into the business in the first place, because there was the GI Bill. I was discharged in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and went to work in New York for the New York Times. And I was fascinated with the newspaper business and journalism, so I decided I wanted to go into journalism. Well, the GI Bill also affected everybody else at the end of the war, and I had to wait a year and a half to get in. And my wife at the time, Jerry, suggested that she was from Montana, Great Falls, and she suggested that I should try the University of Montana because they had a good journalism school. So I wrote to them, and they said, come on out. So I came out.
And what were you going to study at the University of Montana when you first arrived?
Well, I thought it was going to be journalism, but it turned out to be something different. I took a course in philosophy and decided to become a professor in college. But in my sophomore year, I was asked to be a part-time announcer at KGVO. And I thought, oh, that might be interesting. So I tried it.
Well, how did it go?
Not very well.
Say more.
Well, I didn't have the voice then that I have now, or else I was scared, I don't know. But my first shift was following the Jack Benny program. And I had to do station identification and a 30-second spot. And I was nervous to begin with to handle the controls. And then my voice was not its usual. This CBS announcer at the end said in his basso profundo voice, "This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System." And I came on the air and I said, and this is KGVO in Missoula? And I read the 30-second spot and went back to the network. The next morning, the manager told the chief announcer, fire that guy. He'll never make it in this business. And the chief announcer, Jim Robichaud, said, oh, give me a week and I'll work with him. Well, he did, and it worked out. He taught me how to breathe, talk with my diaphragm instead of my nose. And you know the rest of the story.
Well, and you became much more comfortable, obviously, and
Much more
things
comfortable.
progressed
Yeah,
much better from there.
Oh
I
yeah,
take it.
yeah. I wound up doing a morning show. I was Dippy Dan on top of the garbage can at the city dump.
I would have loved to have heard that. So, from Missoula, talk a little bit, if you will, about the progression of your career and when you first began to think about becoming more than just an on-air personality, Dan.
Well, of course, on air was fun because there was some ham in me, and I liked to perform, and there was something about the closeness of the microphone and people, and talking to someone at home, and it was kind of thrilling. It was also fun to spin records. It was great fun to do news as well. I wound up as a program director in Bozeman after a stint in Great Falls after I graduated. I worked for KMOM for a while, and then I went to a fairly new station in Bozeman. And as program director, I was able to do all kinds of things with programming, and it was fun. But I would come up with these program ideas and give them to the salesperson, and he wouldn't do anything with them. So I went to the owner and manager and I said, you know, if that guy leaves, I want his job. I think I could sell better than him. So 2 months later, he left, and I was now the new salesman. Well, that was a frightening experience. I had this program called Candlelight and Silver. It was from 6 to 7, Mantovani and Malacrino strings and so forth. And I thought that the perfect sponsor was Miller Jewelry in Bozeman. So I went in to sell them, and I got to the front door, and I got cold feet. And I walked around the block, and I went and serviced some accounts and did easy things, and I went back. And so the next day, I went back and went in the front door this time, but they were busy. So I walked out. That night, I couldn't sleep, and I vowed I was going to do something about it. I called Miller Jewelry that morning, and I made an appointment, and I sold the program to him. Bill, I didn't walk out of there. I just kind of glided out on air.
Flew.
I said, I could sell. I could sell. I could sell. That was the beginning of my career in selling.
Well, Dan, you've just touched on something that I think is really important for maybe future broadcasters, and that is, here you had the experience of, you hadn't done something selling before, but you had the courage, and somebody obviously had some faith in you enough to let you give it a shot.
Yeah.
And has that been a hallmark of you in your career in trying to help people understand what their potential is and giving them the wings to go try something like that?
I never thought about it, but that's possibly true.
Well, I know it was in my case, but,
Yeah.
We can maybe talk about that. But so from on-air personality only to sales in broadcasting, what came next? What was the next part of the evolution?
Well, the owner of the station, Norman Penwell, was up here in Kalispell with building a cable system, and he left the station for me to run. So that was my first job as manager of a radio station, and I didn't know anything about it. I learned the hard way, and I'd spent a couple of years at that when I had the opportunity, because a couple of building contractors in Great Falls wanted to hire me to build a radio station in Great Falls. And so they offered this through my former father-in-law, Herman Feeden, and he introduced me to him. And so we agreed, and I wrote to the FCC and asked for a construction permit, filled it out, sent it back. I didn't know you were supposed to hire a lawyer, so I just sent it back to the FCC, and somebody advised me to write a letter to Mike Mansfield and have him help you. So I did. Mike wrote to the FCC, and they gave me the construction permit.
Great story. And that station was what? What station?
It was then KBMN in Bozeman.
Mm-hmm. And then how did you progress from there with the station ownerships?
Well, no, the station that I built in Great Falls was KBGF in Great Falls.
And that became?
That became KUDI, and
QD.
then later KQDI.
Mm-hmm.
I made a success out of it right away, but after 18 months, some people from Washington came along and offered us 3 times more money than what we thought it was worth, and it was a chance for me to. My portion of it was to go off and build my own radio station. So we sold it, and I started to proceedings to build a radio station in Rapid City, South Dakota. And some Great Falls businessmen called me to breakfast one day and told me that I couldn't leave town. And I said, well, thank you, I appreciate, you liking me and wanting me to stay, but I can't build any more radio stations. I signed a non-compete agreement. He said, we don't want you to build a radio station, we want you to build a TV station. I said, I don't know anything about TV. They said, you're young and you'll learn.
And you did,
Yeah.
because KRTV became a fine station, and I'd like to chat with you a little bit about the television era that you really helped usher in Montana to a large extent. What was your thought about what television ought to do for not only Great Falls, but all of the communities that KRTV penetrated to and in which people could watch you? What was your thought? I mean, what were you there to provide to them?
Well, of course, the first thing that I thought of was what kind of entertainment can I provide that will make them watch my station as opposed to the other station in Great Falls. They had all 3 networks tied up, ABC, CBS, and NBC. I was low power at 600 watts at the time, which was all the money that I could raise and it worked out all right. But entertainment was the primary goal. What do I do to draw viewers away from there to our station? And since I didn't have a network, I had to buy film. That was a little expensive. And I mean, an hour-long show was just an hour long. So I thought, in prime time, I think I'll just play a movie. Started at 8 o'clock and ended at 10 o'clock. And then I could have the others in afterwards. And the idea of a movie in prime time in those days did it. It did it fine. And I was able to eke by paying film costs and everything else. And interestingly enough, NBC came to me and said they weren't getting all the clearances they needed, and could they send me some shows? And that was the beginning. And it grew from there, and to the point to where I was becoming profitable enough to raise the power. And when I did, then I became a full-time affiliate. Then as a full-time affiliate, I said, now what can I do that's different? So first thing I did was to devise a local hour-long program in the morning. And we followed the Today Show. I called the program Today in Montana. And I was searching around for a co-anchor. And it just so happened that somebody recommended Norma. And so I interviewed her. And she took over and organized it, and we went on the air.
Well, I have to interrupt, Dan, to have you tell for those who come after both of us the story of that first day on the air with Norma and the advice that you gave to Norma as she got ready to go on the air, and how that worked out for you and for her.
Well, understand she'd never been on the air before. She'd had some journalism experience. She graduated from the journalism school at the university. So we were sitting side by side at the desk, and it's about 15 seconds before we go on, and she looked at me, and I didn't see fear in her eyes. I saw stark terror. She said nervously, "Do you have any last-minute advice?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Don't swear on the air and don't pick your nose." And she went from fear to her, she just laughed, and the fear went out of her eyes and they sparkled. She turned around and never looked back.
And today in Montana, and Norma Ashby have been a really shining example of that legacy that you helped foster, and others have imitated, but I don't think you can duplicate those first live shows and the excitement around them.
She did it all herself. All I did was open the door for her, make a few suggestions. She would, when she would do interviews, she would prepare a whole list of things and know so much, and she wouldn't ask a person a question. She'd give all the information, so the person would say, "Yeah, that's right." And I said, "Norma," I said, "they're supposed to say what all you said at the beginning." I said, "Don't do that. Be inquisitive." She changed her modus operandi, and of course, she became adept at it, very adept at it. And she turned out to be an excellent interviewer, far beyond what I had ever hoped.
And the program eventually went statewide, and as I say, others have followed that pattern. But Dan, let's talk for a minute about live television and the technology changes. Talk a little bit, if you will, about what it was like to be with live television versus later when things could be taped or filmed and that kind of thing, and talk a little bit about that evolution.
Well, first of all, I feel this way even to this day. Live television is spontaneous, and you can't beat spontaneity. I mean, you could retape your mistakes and your errors, but some of the fun was in the errors. Like one day the drapes caught fire while we were on the air. She kept going, and I got a fire extinguisher and was putting out the fire. She was interviewing someone with rattlesnakes, and he took a knife and split it open, and 6 little baby rattlers rolled out live on the air. And I'm with a shovel getting them into a bucket and taking them out and burying them right away. So it's things like that which were good. And I also, in addition to Today in Montana, felt that we needed something for the children, the 5-year-olds that were watching cartoons all the time. So I created this program called Playtime. It was a kind of a copy of Romper Room, which was a national show, but it was local, and I had a local hostess, and she had kindergartners, 5-year-olds, on for a week, and she did all kinds of constructive things. And once a week, they had a special guest, an Indian chief. And I didn't personally know any Indian chiefs at the time, but I didn't have a mustache then, so I had Indian garb and a headdress and everything. And I came on as Chief High Antenna. And I sat around and we interviewed people, the youngsters, and this one day I interviewed this little girl. She was so sad. And I says, Chief, high antenna notice you not very happy. You want to tell him, Chief, what is wrong? She screwed up her face and she says, my goldfish died this morning. Oh, you have big burial in backyard? No, Mommy flushed it down the toilet. Well, things like that, they're live. Now, of course, these were in the days when you couldn't really do things like that. But I did tell about Indian lore, which was authentic. I did teach Indian Sign Language, which was authentic, and they enjoyed that. But it was an era that was then. Also created a program for teenagers called the Indispensables. That was another hour-long program. And these were things that I treasured most.
And Dan, these were things, as I sense from your telling and from having seen some of these programs, that were very human, very personal, and that personal connection you might want to talk a little bit about, because you even took some of what you did on the road, especially with Today in Montana, to smaller communities, right?
Yes, I did. Well, there again, we covered the whole High Line, and all those people up there loved us, and especially loved Norma. So I thought we better go to those towns, and now we have tape, and so we could go there and tape the shows, and that worked out great.
And what about the obligation that you felt at that time to not only be part of these communities, but later you obviously increased your news capability and all of those things. There must have been a feeling that you owed the public discussion of issues as well as the entertainment side. And could you say a little bit about that?
Well, I talked about the live programs, but the one thing that I wanted to develop was I wanted to develop an evening newscast. And I'd had several people in and out trying it, but I hadn't hit the right formula. And I was driving to work one day after lunch, and I went by my old radio station on Smelter Avenue, and I heard this voice. And I said, that's the voice, that's the kind of voice and the kind of presentation. The voice was doing a newscast. And I said, that's the kind of presentation I'd like to have on television. So I found out who had that voice. And I called that person up. And that person and I met for the first time. And of course, you know and I know that person was you. And you were that voice.
Well, I appreciated that, and that was to me an example, Dan, of you finding somebody who had never been a news director, and I think I told you that, and you said, well, that's okay, we've never had one either, which I thought, well, touche, may as well try this. But I think it was an example of what I talked about earlier, which is what I have observed and would like you to comment even more on is for young people who want to make a career in broadcasting, what advice would you give them, and what advice would you give broadcasters who may be watching this program about how to develop that talent?
Well, first of all, you have to have a pretty good perception when you interview someone of what kind of potential they have. And that comes in their background, what they've done, and what they haven't done, and it may also be a part of what they dream about and what they hope to do, and so forth. So you get a feel for their potential, and then you give them an opportunity to exercise that potential in whatever it is. It might be in sales, because I've hired and trained a lot of salespeople. It might be in announcers, and so forth, and it might be in engineering. Who knows? But I've been fortunate that I've been able to pick the people and then open the door for them, give them the opportunity, and give them the bit and let them run with it.
Well, Dan, let's talk a little bit about the people that are coming in. We've got just a few minutes left here, the people that are coming in, and are there any trends that you've seen that are especially good or maybe not so good in the current environment that we see in the broadcasting business that you'd like to talk about for just a minute?
Well, you and I are blessed that we're both members of the Board of Trustees of the Greater Montana Foundation. And you know that we give to the university systems, both colleges, money for interns. And it is that the universities themselves, both Bozeman and Missoula, are picking the people and giving them an opportunity. And we're providing money for interns so that they could get experience on air or writing or whatever it is. And they're doing our job now.
That's true.
And they're doing a great job.
Doing a great job.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, it's been just terrific talking with you, and I will, in the 1 minute left, say that one of the great honors that I had was introducing you when you received your Hall of Fame award from the Montana Broadcasters. And I said at the time, and I think it's obvious by the answers to the questions here today, that you're a guy who not only was a pioneer, has continued to work right up into the age of 86, I think.
Yeah.
And only this week, the week of this taping, have retired, I think. If
Finally.
But I know there are many people around who thank you for your contributions to broadcasting in Montana and for your personal contributions to their professional growth. And so on behalf of all of us, I want to say thank you, and thank you on behalf of the Greater Montana Foundation and the Montana Historical Society for joining me here today.
This programming series is brought to you by the Greater Montana Foundation, benefiting the people of Montana through communication of issues, trends, and values of importance for present and future generations of Montanans. And by the Montana Historical Society, Big Sky, Big Land, Big History. And with the help of Cordillera Communications, with stations in Billings, Bozeman, Butte, Great Falls, Missoula, Kalispell, and Helena. Cordillera Communications, the Montana Television Network.